All right, let's dive into something really interesting today. Something that always sparks a lot of debate, a lot of curiosity. We're going to take a deep dive into Satanism.
Yeah.
But to make things even more interesting, we're going to compare and contrast it with Christianity. You might be surprised by what we find along the way.
What's fascinating is how often these two belief systems are framed as total opposites, like good versus evil, this ultimate cosmic battle.
Right.
But when you actually look a little closer, you start to see a much more nuanced picture.
Okay, so what's the mission for our deep dive today?
Yes.
We're not here to just fuel those good versus evil narratives, are we?
No, not at all. We're gonna kind of break down some of those misconceptions and really explore the core ideas in both belief systems. We're gonna compare their approaches to things like morality, human nature, spirituality. It's about understanding them on their own terms, not through Hollywood horror movies or sensationalized headlines.
Right. So basically, we're going to ditch all those preconceived notions and really dive into the source material. Where should we start?
Well, I think a good place to begin is with origins and the symbolism that surrounds both Satanism and Christianity.
Okay, origins and symbolism. That sounds like a good starting point.
Yeah.
Now, I think most people have at least a vague idea of where Christianity came from. But Satanism, that tends to be a little bit more mysterious, a little bit more shrouded in secrecy. Yeah. What can you tell us about the roots of Satanism?
Yeah, well, so the Satanism we're talking about today is specifically the philosophy outlined in the Satanic Bible, which was written by Anton Szandor LaVey in the 1960s. LaVey actually saw this as a direct response to what he viewed as the hypocrisy and the limitations of traditional religions, especially Christianity.
So in a way, Satanism was kind of born out of a reaction to Christianity. That's really interesting. That adds a really interesting layer to our comparison here.
It really does. And speaking of layers, let's talk about Satan, the symbol himself, right? It's important to note that in LaVeyan Satanism, Satan isn't viewed as a literal deity.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
See, I think that's where a lot of the misconceptions about Satanism, where they really take root. People assume that Satanists, they worship the devil.
Right, that's a very common misunderstanding, but it's not the case. Instead, Satan is embraced as the symbol of rebellion, individualism, and the pursuit of earthly fulfillment. He represents a rejection of imposed morality and a celebration of personal freedom.
Okay, now that is a pretty stark contrast to Christianity's focus on God and the pursuit of spiritual salvation.
It is, yeah. Christianity has, this very long and complex history. You have all sorts of different denominations like Catholicism, Protestantism, but they generally all center around faith in God, adherence to his teachings, and this ultimate goal of reaching heaven.
So from the very beginning, we're already seeing this fundamental difference in worldview, right? Where Satanism seems to be very much focused on embracing life here and now, while Christianity is looking beyond this world to the afterlife.
That's exactly right, and I think this difference becomes even more apparent when we start looking at their views on good and evil.
Okay, now you're speaking my language, because this is where it starts to get really interesting to me. We all know Christianity has its 10 commandments, its concept of sin.
Right.
But how does Satanism approach morality? What does that look like?
Well, this is where things get interesting. The Satanic Bible, it actually encourages indulgence in what Christianity would call the 7 deadly sins. Things like greed, lust, pride.
So Satanism basically embraces what most religions consider to be, sinful.
That's right.
That's definitely a different perspective.
It is, and the argument is that these so-called sins are actually just natural human instincts, and that when they're embraced responsibly, they can actually lead to personal gratification and fulfillment. LaVey, he actually questioned the concept of altruism. He suggested that self-interest is actually natural, and that it can even be beneficial.
So it's more about being true to yourselves, not denying your desires. But how does that work in a society that values things like selflessness, compassion? I mean, doesn't that sound like like a recipe for chaos?
That's a good question. And it is important to remember that LaVey also emphasized personal responsibility and self-control.
Yeah.
It's not about just indulging in every whim you have without any regard for consequences.
So it's not just a free path to be, reckless or harmful to others. There are still boundaries.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between, pursuing your own desires and recognizing the impact your actions have on others. And of course, this contrasts very sharply with Christianity's approach to morality.
Right. Christianity advocates for selflessness, love for one's enemies, resisting those, earthly temptations that we just talked about.
Precisely. It's about putting others before yourself, following God's will, even when it means sacrificing, your own desires. And this difference in perspective, you can actually trace it back to the historical tension between Christianity and paganism. Early Christians, who often embraced a more earthly, pleasure-affirming approach, they faced a lot of persecution. And the shift to a Christian dominant society, it involved power struggles and sadly even violence at times.
Wow. So we're talking about a really deep-rooted historical conflict that might still be influencing how we view these belief systems today. But let's shift gears a little bit and explore something a bit more practical. How about rituals and practice? I think this is where things start to get really interesting, maybe a little spooky for some people.
Yeah, you're right. The topic of rituals, I think for a lot of people, it really sparks a lot of curiosity and sometimes even fear. But it's really enlightening to understand how both Satanism and Christianity utilize rituals in their practice. In Satanism, for example, rituals are seen as tools for personal empowerment and catharsis.
Hold on. You have to explain what catharsis means. I'm not entirely sure what that is, and I'm sure some of our listeners might need a little refresher as well.
Yeah, of course. Catharsis, it's essentially the process of releasing pent-up emotions, which can actually be really therapeutic and liberating. And rituals in Satanism provide a structured way to channel those emotions, those desires, those intentions.
So we're not talking about, sacrificing goats under a full moon or anything like that.
Not exactly. The Satanic Bible outlines specific practices and symbols, but they're all designed to help followers kind of connect with their inner selves and achieve their personal goals. You can think of it as a form of psychological self-exploration and transformation.
Okay, so can you give us an example of what a satanic ritual, what that might look like?
Sure. One example would be, a ritual where someone might dress in a specific attire. They might light candles and recite invocations to Satan. Now, remember, these invocations aren't about worshiping a literal deity. They're more about tapping into this symbolic representation of rebellion and personal power.
So it's more about using that symbolism, that ritual, to unlock something within yourself.
Exactly. It's about channeling your desires and intentions through this structured practice. Now, how does this compare to rituals in Christianity? Well, Christianity also uses rituals, but the focus is quite different.
Right. I'm thinking of things like communion or baptism. These are very symbolic and meaningful acts for Christians.
Yes, those are great examples. Take communion, for example, where bread and wine are consumed to represent the body and blood of Christ. It's a central ritual in many Christian denominations. But unlike satanic rituals, which really focus on earthly desires and personal empowerment, Christian rituals are generally they're about connecting with God. They're about seeking forgiveness for sins and preparing for the afterlife.
That's like two sides of the same coin, right? Both belief systems utilize these rituals, but their purposes and their underlying worldviews are completely different. One is about connecting with the self, the other is about connecting with a higher power.
Exactly. And speaking of worldviews, I think it'd be interesting to delve into the role of the individual in both belief systems, because I think you might be surprised to find some unexpected commonalities.
Okay, now this is where I'm really curious. I always thought that Satanism was all about this, radical individualism, while Christianity emphasized, community and submission to God's will.
Yeah, that's a common perception, and to a certain extent, it's true. Satanism does champion self-reliance. It encourages followers to embrace their desires, pursue their own fulfillment, but Christianity isn't always as collectivist as you might think.
Really? How so?
Well, certain branches of Christianity, like those influenced by Ayn Rand's objectivism, they actually place a very strong emphasis on individual responsibility and achievement.
Wait, hold on. Ayn Rand, the author who wrote Atlas Shrugged and advocated for like a very individualistic philosophy.
Yes, that's right. Now, while Rand wasn't a Christian herself, her ideas about rational self-interest and the importance of individual achievement, they've actually resonated with some Christian thinkers and theologians. They believe that individuals should strive for their own success and happiness within a moral framework, of course.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So while the overall philosophies of Satanism and Christianity are clearly very distinct, there are these unexpected overlaps in how they view the individual.
Absolutely. It just goes to show that even seemingly opposite belief systems can have points of convergence. It's a reminder to avoid oversimplifying things and to always dig a little deeper.
I agree. And speaking of digging deeper, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. The misconceptions and the media representations of Satanism, particularly during that satanic panic era in the late 20th century.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to understand how misinformation and fear can really, really distort public perception. That period was a stark example of how unfounded rumors and misinterpretations, often fueled by sensationalized media coverage, it led to this widespread fear and even accusations of ritual abuse.
Yeah, I remember hearing stories about people claiming that the Satanic Bible was like this guide to evil rituals and demonic worship. But it sounds almost comical now, but back then it created real panic, and it even led to some innocent people being wrongly accused.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging a belief system without truly understanding. The irony is that LaVey himself often pointed out that his book was more about empowering individuals to take control of their own lives and reject dogma than it was about worshiping a literal devil.
It sounds like a lot of people just projected their own fears and anxieties onto something they didn't understand. It took the name Satanism and automatically assumed the worst.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to go beyond the headlines, the stereotypes, and really examine the nuances of these belief systems.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up this fascinating exploration, I think it's important to touch on one more point: the relationship between Satanism and Christianity in terms of their respective views on humanity's place in the world. We've already talked about their differing perspectives on good and evil, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how each belief system kind of interprets the overall human condition.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Satanism seems to view humanity as inherently self-serving. But then you have Christianity, which often frames us as these flawed beings in need of redemption, like two totally different lenses through which to view our existence. Yeah. That's a great observation. You could say that Satanism, it kind of encourages us to embrace our earthly nature, to really revel in those desires and strive for that personal fulfillment. In a way, it's a celebration of the here and now aspect of the human experience.
While Christianity, on the other hand, often emphasizes our need to overcome those base desires and strive for something greater, that spiritual connection with God and the promise of an afterlife.
Right, exactly. It's about transcending those earthly limitations and seeking something beyond ourselves. It's a more I guess you'd say outward looking perspective, focused on our relationship with the divine and our place in this larger cosmic order.
It's almost as if these two belief systems, they represent these two fundamental aspects of human nature. You have that drive for individual satisfaction, but then you also have this longing for something that transcends our earthly existence.
And what's fascinating is that both perspectives, despite their apparent contradictions, they ultimately grapple with those same core questions. What does it mean? What does it mean to be human? What is our purpose? What is the nature of good and evil?
It makes you wonder if exploring these these seemingly opposing philosophies, if it can actually lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the complexities of the human experience.
I think it absolutely can. By examining different perspectives, even those that challenge our own beliefs, I think we can gain a much more nuanced and multifaceted view of the world.
So as we wrap up this fascinating deep dive, what does all this mean for our listener? We've explored the origins, the symbolism, the morality, the rituals, even those differing views on humanity in both Satanism and Christianity, and we've seen these surprising parallels, these stark contrasts. But ultimately, it seems like both paths are really grappling with those fundamental questions that have haunted humanity for centuries.
We hope this deep dive has provided you with some valuable insights and perhaps even challenged some of your preconceived notions. As always, we encourage you to continue exploring and to seek out those diverse perspectives.
And to leave you with a thought-provoking question: Could a deeper understanding of seemingly opposing belief systems like Satanism and Christianity, could it actually enrich our understanding of ourselves and the complexities of human nature?
We'll leave you to ponder that.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep diving deep.